My name is Aria. I am 25 years old, and a year ago, I got married. On the surface, my life looks exactly like what a girl of my age should dream of. My husband is kind, attentive, and for the most part, loving. We live in a comfortable apartment, we share dinners together, and he makes me laugh with his silly jokes when I'm feeling tired after a long day. My parents adore him, and society nods in approval at the life I chose. By all accounts, I should feel complete. And yet, deep inside me, there is a space that refuses to be filled. No matter how much I try to embrace this marriage, no matter how much I try to convince myself that I am happy, memories of another person haunt me, my former boss, Sophia. Sophia was 10 years older than me, 35 when I worked under her. She was the kind of woman who carried authority without ever needing to raise her voice. Her presence in a room was undeniable. She was strong, respected, admired, but behind that strength, there was a softness only a few people ever got to see. I was one of those people. At work, she guided me with patience. She noticed the details others overlooked. She would ask if I had eaten when she saw me skipping lunch for deadlines. When I fell sick once, she personally sent me home and called later to make sure I had taken my medicine. It was these little things, these tiny fragments of care, that built a world between us, quietly, without announcement. I didn't even realize when admiration turned into something deeper, something that made my heart beat differently when she stood too close. The night before my wedding, I went to see her. I had convinced myself it was just to say goodbye properly, to thank her for everything she had done for me as a mentor. But when I entered her office, the air was heavy with unspoken emotions. She was sitting at her desk, pretending to go through papers, but her eyes were moist, her hands restless. When she finally looked up at me, the facade broke. "You're really leaving," she whispered, as though saying it aloud made it more real. I stood frozen, clutching the edge of my shawl, not knowing how to respond. My throat was tight, my chest heavy. I wanted to tell her that I didn't want to leave, that a part of me was terrified of stepping into a life that wasn't hers. But all I managed was silence. She got up, walked around the desk, and stood in front of me. Her eyes glistened with tears she was trying hard to hide. "I just want you to be happy," she said. Her voice broke on the last word. When she hugged me, it felt like the world had collapsed and rebuilt itself around that single embrace. I felt her tears dampen my shoulder. My own eyes burned, but I forced myself not to cry. If I broke down, I knew I might never leave that room. Her last words to me that night still echo inside me, louder than any vows I took the next day. "Goodbye, Aria," she said, her voice trembling. "May life give you everything I couldn't." It was the first and only time I had seen Sophia cry. That memory still pierces me more sharply than any pain I have endured since. Now, sitting here a year into my marriage, I find myself revisiting that moment more often than I should. My husband, with his kindness, deserves my full attention. He brings me flowers, takes me out on weekends, and holds my hand when we walk into family gatherings. He looks at me with love in his eyes, and I feel guilty for not being able to return it with the same purity. Because every time he holds my hand, I remember how it felt when Sophia held me for the last time. Sometimes at night, when he is asleep beside me, I lie awake and wonder why the image of her face won't leave me. Why her tears feel more vivid than my own laughter. Why her goodbye feels heavier than my new beginning. Shouldn't I be happy? Shouldn't I be grateful? I tell myself I am. I try to count my blessings. But in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, I can't help but ask myself, why do I still think of her? Why does the love I never allowed to bloom weigh more than the marriage I chose? I don't have the answer. All I know is that a year has passed, and the memory of Sophia has not faded. If anything, it has grown sharper, like a wound that refuses to heal. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear her voice, soft, broken, and unforgettable. Goodbye, Aria. When I think back to those days at the office, before marriage changed everything, I realize how much of myself was quietly shaped by Sophia. She wasn't just my boss, she was the kind of leader who inspired without ever raising her voice. Her presence was enough to command respect, but what touched me most was the way she treated people, not just as employees, but as human beings. I still remember my first week at the job. I was nervous, fresh out of university, eager to prove myself. I stayed late every evening, wanting to make a good impression. One night, as I sat buried under paperwork, I heard the click of her heels approaching. Aria, she said gently, setting a cup of coffee beside me. You don't have to stay this late. Work will always be here tomorrow. I looked up, startled. She gave me a small smile, one that softened the sharpness of her professional aura. I mumbled something about wanting to do well. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment, and then simply said, "You already are." That was the first time she saw me, not just as another employee, but as a person trying to find her place in the world. From then on, I noticed how attuned she was to me. If I skipped lunch, she'd leave a sandwich on my desk with no explanation. If my shoulders slumped from exhaustion, she'd ask if I was sleeping enough. She noticed everything, even the things I didn't say out loud. One winter evening, I fell ill at the office. I had a fever, but I didn't want to leave because of a pending deadline. She came over, touched my forehead lightly, and immediately insisted I go home. "You're not a machine," she said firmly. "You're allowed to take care of yourself." I tried to protest, but she called a cab herself and waited with me in the lobby until it arrived. That night, as I lay in bed with a heavy head, my phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "Did you eat something warm? Take the medicine, Aria. Sleep early. Good night." It was such a simple thing, but I stared at that message for a long time. No one had ever cared for me that way outside my family. Something in me shifted quietly that night. As months passed, we grew closer. Not in a way that crossed any obvious boundaries, but in the subtle, delicate way two souls recognize each other. Sometimes we stayed late in the office, the building nearly empty, our conversation drifting away from work. She would ask about my childhood, my dreams, my fears. She told me about her struggles, how she had to fight for respect in a world that often dismissed her because she was a woman in power. There were moments of silence too, comfortable ones. I'd sit typing, and she'd review a file across from me, the quiet hum of the office machines around us. Every now and then, our eyes would meet, and something unspoken would pass between us. It was never said, never acknowledged, but it lived in the way she lingered just a second longer when handing me a document, in the way her eyes softened when I laughed, in the way her voice grew gentler when it was just the two of us. I remember one particular evening when the rain was pouring outside. Most people had already left, and she offered to drop me home. On the drive, we talked about everything and nothing. At one point, she slowed the car and glanced at me. Her eyes held a question, one she never voiced. My heart raced, but I looked away, too afraid of what might happen if I acknowledged it. It became our silent rhythm, this dance of almosts and maybes. I never dared to name what I felt, and she never forced me to. But her care, her protectiveness, spoke louder than words. The truth revealed itself the day I told her about my marriage proposal. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they are holding back tears. "That's wonderful, Aria," she said softly. "He's lucky to have you." But her eyes betrayed her. They glistened with a sadness I had never seen in her before. I wanted to reach out, to tell her that I wasn't sure, that my heart was tangled in something I couldn't explain. But the weight of tradition, of expectations, pressed too heavily on me. The day I left the office for the last time before my wedding, she came to my desk. She didn't say much. She just looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if trying to memorize me. Then, without a word, she pulled me into her arms. That hug was unlike anything I had felt before. Strong, protective, yet trembling. I felt her tears wet my shoulder, and for the first time, the woman I had always seen as unshakable revealed her vulnerability. "I just want you to be happy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself." I nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. When she finally let go, she wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a small smile. "Goodbye, Aria," she said. "May life give you everything I couldn't." I carried those words with me into my marriage, and they never stopped echoing inside me. The image of Sophia, standing there with tears in her eyes, is carved into my heart. And now, a year later, every time I think of happiness, every time I question love, I return to that moment, to the woman who loved me without asking for anything in return, who let me go even when it broke her. Marriage, in many ways, was everything I had been told it would be. My husband was gentle, attentive, and in the beginning, it felt like we were building something real together. He would bring me small gifts, flowers from the market, a favorite snack after work, a book he thought I might like. We laughed together often. On quiet evenings, he would sit beside me with a cup of tea in his hands and talk about our future, our plans to buy a bigger home someday, the vacations we might take, the family we might raise. There were mornings when I woke up to his hand resting protectively over mine, and I would smile at the sight of his peaceful face. He had a way of making me feel safe, like no harm could ever reach me as long as he was around. And in those moments, I was grateful. Grateful for stability, grateful for the comfort of his companionship. But beneath all that warmth, there was an emptiness. A quiet ache that refused to leave me. Because as much as I tried to give myself fully to him, as much as I wanted to let this love be enough, Sophia lived in the spaces between my breaths. She was in the shadows of my laughter, in the silence of my nights, in the memories that replayed like an old film I couldn't turn off. Sometimes, when my husband talked about his dreams for us, my mind drifted. I found myself wondering what Sophia's dreams had been, what kind of life she had imagined for herself. Did she ever think of me in those late hours when the world went quiet? Did she ever sit by her window, remembering me the way I remembered her? At night, when my husband fell asleep beside me, I often lay awake staring at the ceiling. In the darkness, I imagined a life that could have been mine, the life where I hadn't walked away from her tears, where I had been brave enough to listen to my own heart. I imagined sitting across from her at dinner, not as boss and employee, but as two women who had chosen each other. I imagined mornings where it was her voice that woke me, her hand that reached for mine, her eyes that carried me through the day. These thoughts weren't something I confessed to anyone, not even myself, not fully. Instead, I buried them beneath smiles, beneath the routine of married life. I cooked, I laughed, I listened to my husband's stories, and I played the role expected of me. On the outside, everything seemed perfect. But inside, there was always this contradiction, this battle between the life I had chosen and the love I had left behind. Sometimes, I would catch myself comparing them, even though I knew it wasn't fair. My husband was kind, yes, but his love was simple, almost ordinary. Sophia's love, though unspoken, had been extraordinary. It had lived in the way she noticed the smallest changes in me, in the way she cared without needing recognition, in the way her presence could silence my chaos. With him, I felt secure. With her, I had felt seen. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my husband came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You're too quiet tonight," he said lightly, kissing the top of my head. I forced a smile. "Just tired," I replied, though in truth my mind had been wandering again, to her, always to her. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I wondered why I couldn't let go. Why, even after a year, the memory of her hug, her tears, her goodbye still cut deeper than any joy I felt now. I asked myself if this was normal, if perhaps everyone carried ghosts of past loves into their marriages. But the difference was clear: Sophia wasn't just a ghost. She was alive, somewhere out there, living her life while mine carried on without her. And I missed her in a way that felt endless. I loved my husband in my own way. I truly did. But love, I realized, has layers. My love for him was grounded in care, in companionship, in comfort. My love for Sophia was something else entirely. It was fire and depth, a bond that never needed words, a love I had never even allowed myself to confess out loud. And that contradiction was my secret burden. By day, I was a wife, smiling, cooking, planning, laughing. By night, I was a woman haunted by the memory of someone I let slip away. A part of me belonged here, in this marriage, in this home. But another part of me was still standing in that office, in Sophia's arms, hearing her whisper goodbye. And the truth that frightened me most was this: even in the moments when I thought I was happy, I knew my happiness was incomplete. Because no matter how much I tried to silence it, my heart still beat for her. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that began like any other. My husband had just returned from work, humming softly as he went to shower. I was setting the table for dinner, when I noticed his phone buzzing relentlessly on the counter. At first, I ignored it. But the calls kept coming, one after another, like someone desperate to reach him. Curiosity pulled me closer. I told myself I was only checking in case it was urgent, maybe work-related. My hand hesitated for a moment above the device before I finally picked it up. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. A woman's name. Something inside me shifted. I unlocked the phone almost mechanically, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. But the moment the messages appeared, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, thread after thread of conversation. Simple greetings at first glance, but weighted with more meaning the longer I stared. Good morning, heavy black heart hash. Good night, face throwing a kiss, tiny words paired with hearts and kisses. And there, interwoven with them, were his replies. Morning, love. Sleep well, heavy black heart hash. My hands trembled as I scrolled further, each message like a knife pressing deeper. There were jokes, casual flirtations, little confessions of missing one another. It wasn't just harmless chatter, it was intimacy. Intimacy he shared with someone who wasn't me. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My chest felt hollow, as if the air had been knocked out of me. 1,000 thoughts rushed in at once, each louder than the last. Was this just playful? Was it harmless? Or was it exactly what it looked like, something more, something that had already crossed the invisible line of trust? I wanted to throw the phone down, to erase what I had seen, to pretend it was all just a misunderstanding. But my eyes kept going back to those words, those emojis, those replies. They weren't the words of a man merely being polite. They were the words of a man who was giving his heart, pieces of it, at least, to someone else. I heard the sound of water running in the bathroom, and panic flooded me. What was I doing? This was his phone, his privacy. Maybe I was reading too much into this. Maybe it was nothing, just friendship written in a way that seemed misleading. I quickly locked the phone and placed it back exactly where I had found it, my heart racing as though I had just committed a crime. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to calm the storm rising inside me. When he stepped out of the shower moments later, smiling and asking what was for dinner, I smiled back as if nothing had happened. But inside, nothing was the same. All through the meal, I replayed the messages in my head, dissecting every word, every symbol. The way she said, love. The way he replied with a heart. The way their conversations seemed so effortless, so frequent. A part of me screamed to confront him, to demand answers. But another part whispered to wait, to not make a scene over something that might be innocent. After all, wasn't I already guilty of betrayal in my own way? I had spent months thinking of Sophia, longing for her, comparing my marriage to what I could have had with her. Wasn't this just karma coming back to me? That night, I lay beside him, his arm draped over me as if nothing were wrong. I stared at the ceiling in silence, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Outwardly, I was calm. Inwardly, I was breaking. Because whether it was harmless or not, the seed of doubt had been planted. And no matter how much I tried to brush it off, I knew it would grow. I told myself again and again, you're overthinking. Don't ruin your marriage over a few messages. Don't create problems where there are none. But my heart refused to believe it. For the first time since our wedding, I realized I didn't feel secure anymore. Something was slipping, and no matter how tightly I held on, I feared it was only the beginning. It was at a family friend's party, when the cracks in my marriage could no longer be ignored. The house was alive with music and laughter, glasses clinking, people moving through the rooms in clusters of chatter. My husband held my hand as we entered, smiling warmly at everyone, introducing me to those I hadn't met before. From the outside, we looked perfect, young, happy, married. But perfection has a way of shattering when you least expect it. I had just stepped aside to fetch a glass of juice, when I saw him across the room. He was talking to someone, his body turned toward her, his posture open, comfortable, too comfortable. As I walked closer, my heart clenched. It was her. The name I had seen on his phone. The woman who sent him good mornings and good nights, who filled his screen with hearts and kisses. And there he was, embracing her. Not the polite, casual kind of hug you give an acquaintance at a party. This one lingered. His arms wrapped firmly around her, his face pressed close to hers, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And she, smiling, leaned into him without hesitation. The room spun for a moment. The chatter around me blurred into noise I couldn't decipher. I stood frozen, gripping the edge of my glass so tightly I feared it might break. There it was, the confirmation my heart had dreaded, the betrayal written clearly before my eyes. I wanted to scream, to storm across the room and demand answers. I wanted to tear the mask off the moment, to shout at everyone that the man they saw as my loving husband was nothing but a liar. But my body betrayed me. I stood still, silent, watching, as if paralyzed by the weight of it all. He pulled away after a moment, laughing, saying something to her I couldn't hear. The way his eyes sparkled when he looked at her was a look I had once believed was mine alone. And in that instant, I knew the truth. I was not overthinking. I was not imagining things. He had given a part of himself to her, a part he no longer offered to me. I turned away, unable to watch any longer. My chest ached as though something inside me had cracked open. I wandered into a quieter corner of the house, away from the music and the voices, trying to steady my breathing. Tears stung at the corners of my eyes, but I forced them back, unwilling to break down in front of strangers. My mind screamed questions I couldn't answer. When did it begin? Was it while I was busy cooking dinner, folding clothes, planning our future together? Was I blind, or did I simply choose not to see? And then, softly, almost cruelly, another voice echoed within me, Sophia's. Or rather, my memory of her. She never would have done this to me. The realization pierced me deeper than the sight of my husband's betrayal. I had left behind the woman who had loved me in silence, who had let me go even when it broke her, who had cared for me in ways no one else had. I had traded that love for this, for the comfort of marriage, for society's approval, for a promise that now felt hollow. I closed my eyes and remembered the way Sophia's arms had held me, strong yet trembling, her voice breaking as she wished me happiness. And I couldn't help but think, if I had chosen her, if I had listened to my heart instead of my fear, I would not be standing here broken. By the time my husband returned to me, cheerful and oblivious, I had already composed myself. I smiled faintly, nodding as he introduced me to another guest. But inside, I was unraveling. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, standing beside a man whose touch now burned instead of soothed. The party went on, but for me, the night was over. The laughter, the music, the conversations, they all faded into a distant hum. All I could hear was the silent truth repeating in my chest. I had given up the one who loved me, and in return, I had been left with betrayal. It began with a restlessness I couldn't shake. After that party, every time my husband's phone lit up, every time he stepped out claiming to meet a friend or to work late, my heart grew heavier. I tried to trust him, I wanted to. But the memory of that hug, the softness in his eyes when he looked at her, gnawed at me until I could no longer ignore it. One evening, when he said he had a late meeting with colleagues, something inside me snapped. I smiled and nodded as he left, pretending to accept his words, but the moment the door closed behind him, I grabbed my shawl and followed. My heart pounded like a drum, my hands trembling as I walked a few steps behind, careful not to be noticed. His car stopped outside a quiet hotel on the edge of the city. Not a place for meetings. Not a place for friends. I stood in the shadows as he stepped out, adjusting his shirt, running a hand through his hair. And then, she appeared. The same girl. The one from his phone, the one from the party. She smiled as though she belonged to him, as though their world had no room for me. He greeted her with the kind of ease that broke me, pulling her close, his arm slipping around her waist as they walked inside together. No hesitation, no guilt, no secrecy between them. Only me, the hidden one, the wife standing in the dark watching the truth unfold. I couldn't move for a moment. My feet felt glued to the ground, my breath sharp and uneven. My chest tightened with a pain that spread like fire through my veins. I had suspected, yes, but seeing him with her, choosing her openly, was a wound deeper than I imagined. As they disappeared inside, I leaned against the wall, tears spilling silently. My body shook with sobs I couldn't let anyone hear. This was it. The truth I had feared was no longer a shadow, it stood before me, undeniable. And in the silence of that moment, memories of Sophia came rushing back. Her laughter in the office late at night, her gentle hand on my shoulder when I was tired, the way her eyes held me as if I were the only one in the world. She had loved me without ever asking for anything in return. She had cried when I left her, not because she was angry, but because she knew she was losing me forever. I remembered her voice breaking as she whispered, "Be happy, Aria. That's all I want." And I had walked away, convinced marriage would give me the life I was supposed to live. And yet here I was, standing outside a hotel, watching my husband walk into another woman's arms. The irony was cruel. I had abandoned the one who loved me truly, for someone who would break me so carelessly. Silent tears slid down my cheeks as the words formed inside me, bitter and aching. I gave up the one who truly loved me, for someone who broke me. I stayed there for a long while, unable to move, unable to think beyond the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Cars passed, strangers walked by, but I was lost in my own world of grief. My marriage felt like glass, shattered into pieces too sharp to ever hold again. When I finally turned back toward home, my steps were heavy, my body drained. Each footfall echoed the same truth: I had chosen wrong. I had chosen safety over love, fear over courage, and now I was paying the price. The night air was cold, but it was nothing compared to the chill inside me. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders, as though it could shield me from the reality I had witnessed. But nothing could. Not anymore. That night, I closed the bedroom door and collapsed onto the floor. My body felt too heavy for the bed, too fragile to stand. The tears I had been holding back all evening poured out of me like a river that had been waiting to burst its dam. I pressed my palms against my face, muffling the sobs, but the sound escaped anyway, filling the silence of the room. I thought of him, my husband, laughing, smiling, touching her the way a man touches someone he belongs to. And then I thought of Sophia, of the way she used to look at me as if I carried her whole world in my hands. The contrast was so sharp it tore me open. I curled up on the floor, hugging my knees to my chest, and whispered into the emptiness, why did I leave her? Why did I believe marriage meant love? Why did I think I could erase her from my heart? The memories flooded in without mercy. Late nights in the office when Sophia would notice the tiredness in my eyes before I even said a word. The way she would bring me tea without asking, placing it gently on my desk with a smile that said she cared more than she ever dared to confess. The evenings when I would talk about my dreams and my fears, and she would listen with an attention so rare, so precious, that I felt seen in a way no one else had ever seen me. And then there was that night before my wedding. Her tears. Her trembling voice. The way she held back her words, choosing silence over confession, because she didn't want to burden me. She loved me enough to let me go, even though it broke her. And I, selfish, blind, walked away, telling myself it was the right thing to do. Now, sitting on the cold floor of my own home, I realized I had left behind something sacred. I had traded pure, unspoken love for a promise of stability, for the image of a perfect life. And what did I gain? A man who could not stay faithful, a marriage already stained by betrayal. I stared at the ceiling, my eyes swollen and burning, and whispered to myself, sometimes we mistake stability for love, and love for weakness. How true those words felt now. I had mistaken Sophia's softness for fragility, her quiet devotion for something less than love. I had convinced myself that the safe choice, the socially acceptable choice, was the better one. Marriage to a man who seemed perfect on paper. A future that looked bright from the outside. But love, real love, doesn't always look polished. Sometimes it hides in the small gestures, in the quiet presence of someone who never lets you feel alone. And that was Sophia. She had been my constant, my anchor, my hidden joy. I didn't need to hear her say, I love you, to know that she did. It was in every glance, every word, every act of care. She valued me, not for what I could give her, not for appearances, not for obligation. She valued me simply because I was me. My husband, on the other hand, had given me all the right words in the beginning, promises, laughter, the illusion of devotion. But words are light, empty things when they aren't backed by truth. He had been quick to tell me I was his world, and just as quick to offer that world to someone else when I wasn't looking. The ache in my chest grew unbearable. I pressed a hand over my heart as though I could hold it together, but it was already breaking into pieces. My sobs grew louder, echoing in the stillness, until I was gasping for breath. I thought of Sophia's hands, how steady they always were, how safe I felt when she placed them gently on my shoulder. I thought of her eyes, full of emotions she never spoke, but which I understood all the same. And I realized, with a pain so deep it nearly swallowed me, that I had walked away from the only person who had ever loved me without conditions. The room felt suffocating, the silence too heavy. I wanted to scream, to rewind time, to run back to that moment when Sophia stood before me in tears and hold her instead of leaving. But life doesn't give second chances that easily. I wiped my face, though the tears kept coming, and whispered, Sophia, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The words trembled into the darkness, unheard by the one they were meant for, but heavy with truth. That night, sleep never came. I lay curled on the floor until the morning light crept through the curtains, my body weak, my soul hollow. My husband returned later, his footsteps casual, his smile practiced, as if nothing had happened. But I had seen everything. I knew. And worse, I knew myself now. I had been loved by someone rare, someone true. And I had thrown it away, the next evening, I sat across from my husband at the dining table. The untouched dinner between us grew cold as silence filled the room. He scrolled through his phone casually, as though our lives weren't unraveling in front of him. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say all day, but now, looking at him, I felt strangely calm. Not angry, not hysterical. Just resolved. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly. He glanced up, surprised by my tone. "Of course. What's wrong?" I met his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't look away. "I know," I said simply. He frowned, playing dumb. "Know what?" "The messages. The calls. The hotel. The girl." My voice didn't waver. "I know everything." The color drained from his face, and for a long second he was silent. Then he sighed, putting his phone down, rubbing the back of his neck. "Aria," his voice was low, almost guilty. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way. That's all you have to say." My hands trembled under the table, but I kept my tone steady. He leaned back in his chair, avoiding my gaze. I care about you, you know that. But things between us, they haven't felt right for a long time. She came into my life when I was. Don't," I cut in sharply. "Don't you dare justify betrayal as if it's an accident. You chose this." He pressed his lips together, guilt flickering across his face before he finally nodded. "You're right. I did." And there it was. The truth, spoken plainly at last. No excuses, no lies. Just the confirmation of what I had feared, but already known in my bones. I let the silence linger. My chest felt heavy, but underneath the pain, there was also clarity. I realized I didn't need to scream or beg for answers. I had them already. And the woman sitting at this table, the version of me who once believed his promises, was gone. "I'm leaving," I said softly. His head snapped up. "What?" "Aria, wait." I shook my head. "No. I've given everything I could to this marriage. My trust, my loyalty, my heart. And you threw it away. I won't fight for someone who didn't fight for me." He looked stricken, reaching across the table as if to hold my hand. I pulled mine back. "Please," he whispered. "Don't end it like this." But it was already over. I had cried all my tears in secret. Tonight, I wasn't breaking anymore, I was choosing myself. Later that night, after packing a small suitcase, I sat alone in the spare room with my laptop open. The house was eerily quiet. My heart ached, but strangely, I felt lighter. There is a certain peace that comes with finality. I opened my inbox, more out of distraction than purpose, when I noticed something unusual. An unread message. The sender's name froze me where I sat today. Sophia. My breath hitched. My trembling hands clicked the message open. The subject line was simple: "I hope this reaches you." The email began slowly, almost hesitant, like a letter written with shaking hands. "Aria. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I've written it a dozen times over the past year, deleting it each time, because I didn't want to disturb your life. But tonight, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I still think of you every day." Tears welled up instantly. I covered my mouth with my hand, my heart pounding as I kept reading. "Not a day goes by when I don't wonder how you are, if you're happy, if you smile the way you used to. I told myself I had to let you go because that's what love meant, giving you the future you wanted. But the truth is, letting you go has been the hardest thing I've ever done. If life ever gives us another chance, I'll be here. No questions, no bitterness. Just love. Always. Sophia." By the time I reached the end, the words blurred through my tears. I pressed a hand against my chest, overwhelmed by the ache of it all. A year had passed. A lifetime, it felt like. And yet here she was, her love untouched by time, her heart still tethered to mine. I whispered her name into the empty room, the sound breaking as it left me. Sophia. For the first time in weeks, my tears weren't just from pain. They were from something else, something softer, warmer. Hope. The next morning, I stood by the window with my packed suitcase, watching the sun rise. My husband stirred in the other room, unaware that this time, I wouldn't be coming back. I wasn't leaving because of him, not really. I was leaving because of me. Because I finally understood that my worth wasn't tied to his faithfulness, and my future didn't depend on a broken promise. As I zipped up my bag, my mind returned to Sophia's words. If life ever gives us another chance, I'll be here. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe I would reach out to her, maybe I wouldn't. Maybe our paths would cross again, or maybe life would keep us apart. But knowing she still thought of me, still carried me in her heart, gave me strength I didn't know I had. Love hadn't died, even if it had changed form. As I walked out the door, suitcase in hand, I whispered to myself, this isn't the end. Not for me. Not for love. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it.